Imagine a human heartbeat, like racing at 220 beats per minute.
Right, which is just incredibly fast.
Yeah, it's insane. I mean, if you are sitting in a hospital emergency room and you're looking at a monitor, a heart rate of 220 beats per minute is, it's a critical cardiac event.
That's a full-blown emergency.
Exactly. The body is in complete overdrive, pushing itself to the absolute physical limit of what flesh and blood can withstand. But if you travel to the sprawling, densely packed slums of Dar es Salaam on the coast of East Africa, 220 beats per minute isn't a medical emergency at all.
No, not even close.
It is simply the baseline tempo for a Friday night dance floor, which is just mind-blowing to me.
It really is. I mean, it is a physiological threshold that completely changes how the human brain processes sound.
Okay, unpack that a bit.
Well, when music pushes past, say, 180 or 190 or 200 beats per minute, it basically bypasses the analytical parts of your brain entirely. Yeah, you stop interpreting the melody or tapping your finger to the rhythm in a conscious way. The sound interfaces directly with your central nervous system.
So it's not even a choice anymore.
Exactly. It triggers an involuntary binary response in the body. You are either overwhelmed into total stillness, or you are physically compelled to move. I mean, there is no casual head nodding at 220 BPM.
You're either sweating or you're frozen.
Spot on.
And what we discovered in the massive stack of sources we've gathered for you today, ranging from deep cultural analyses to underground music reviews, is that there's actually a highly specific word for that exact uncontrollable physiological response.
Right, because we don't really have a good equivalent in English.
We don't. We say things like getting into the groove or catching a vibe.
Which sounds way too relaxed.
Yeah, those phrases sound like you were sipping coffee at a Sunday jazz brunch. The word we are looking at comes from the Luganda language, which is spoken widely in Uganda. And according to the phonetic guides in our research, I want to make sure I get this right, it is pronounced Nyege Nyege.
Right.
Nyege Nyege. It translates quite literally to the absolute uncontrollable urge to dance.
And what's fascinating here is that Nyege is no longer functioning just as a descriptive noun in the Luganda dictionary.
It's become something way bigger.
Oh, massively. Over the past decade or so, it has mutated into a proper noun, and an incredibly powerful one at that. It is the name of a Kampala, Uganda-based music collective that has systematically captured that exact uncontrollable urge, engineered it, and is now exporting it across the globe.
It's wild.
They are widely recognized as the absolute pioneers of a movement that the global electronic music scene is labeling outsider music.
Okay, let's unpack this immediately because I know exactly what comes to mind when you hear the phrase outsider music.
Yeah, the stereotypes.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You picture someone in a dimly lit garage, maybe playing an out-of-tune acoustic guitar with a violin bow.
Right, recording on a broken cassette tape?
Yes. Intentionally trying to sound as abrasive and inaccessible as humanly possible. But reading through these sources, that is absolutely not what the Nyege Nyege collective is doing.
Far from it. I mean, in this specific cultural context, outsider music does not mean amateurish or intentionally abrasive. Not at all.
Right.
It refers to a highly sophisticated, radical, and deeply intentional fusion of two worlds that previously, well, they rarely interacted on this scale.
So what are these producers actually doing?
The producers in this collective are taking deeply traditional African music, and we are talking about hyperlocal rhythms, ancestral vocal styles, and ancient stringed instruments that have been culturally vital for centuries.
The really foundational stuff.
Exactly, and they are violently colliding them with modern electronic club beats. They are taking the acoustic heritage of rural villages and forcing it through the circuitry of urban drum machines and digital synthesizers.
Which is just such a crazy image.
It is, and the result is completely rewriting the DNA of the global electronic music scene.
And that is exactly the journey we have prepared for you today. Welcome to this deep dive.
We've got a lot of ground to cover.
We really do. Whether you are listening to prep for a creative meeting, or you're trying to catch up on the absolute bleeding edge of global youth culture, or, you are simply insanely curious about how an entirely new musical language is invented from scratch, you are in the exact right place.
Absolutely.
We are going to trace the origins of this Nyege Nyege collective from a sweaty local party to a global empire.
Yeah.
We are going to put three mind-bending, hyper-specific musical genres under the microscope and explain exactly how they work.
The acoustics of it are fascinating.
They really are. Plus, We were going to drop you right in the middle of a massive 60,000-person festival on the banks of the Nile River. And by the end of this, you're going to understand exactly why this obscure East African collective is currently holding the attention of the entire global music industry.
Right. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, we are watching a masterclass in cultural alchemy.
Oh, I like that phrasing.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't just about making people dance, you know? It is about taking localized history and projecting it onto a global canvas using technology. But to truly grasp the mechanics of how they're doing this, we have to isolate the initial spark.
We have to go back to the beginning.
We have to look at the environment that necessitated this kind of extreme musical experimentation in the first place.
Right, and the sources pinpoint the exact time and place for this spark. It's Kampala, Uganda, in the year 2013. And we have two central figures anchoring this origin story.
Right, the founders.
Yeah, one is an American named Arlen Dilsizian, and the other is a Belgian named Derek De Breu. They started organizing a series of events in Kampala, essentially just local underground parties, which they called boutique electronic.
And the geography and the timing are the most critical variables here.
How so?
Well, Kampala in 2013 is a fascinating urban environment. It is vibrant, chaotic, and expanding rapidly. It is teeming with young people looking for an identity.
Right, a massive youth culture.
Exactly. But the electronic music that was dominating the clubs and radio stations at that time was largely imported.
Like Western stuff.
Yeah, it was standard house or techno from Europe or America, or maybe glossy commercial Afrobeats. It didn't possess the specific, frantic, localized energy of the Kampala streets. Dilsizian and De Breu realized there was a massive disconnect between the music available and the lived experience of the youth.
So they threw a party to fix the disconnect.
Basically, yeah.
But they didn't just book a DJ to play a different playlist. The documentation of these early boutique electronic events describes them as chaotic laboratories.
That's a great way to put it.
They would have a local DJ spinning electronic beats, but then they would literally drag in live traditional percussionists to play over the top of the digital track.
Just jamming over it.
Yeah, they were pulling whatever equipment they had, whatever musicians were willing to experiment, and throwing them all into the same room just to see what would happen when those acoustic and digital sound waves literally collided in the air.
It was an exercise in pure trial and error. I mean, they were building a temporary autonomous zone where the rules of traditional music and the rules of Western club music were both suspended simultaneously.
I keep picturing the early days of hip-hop in the Bronx in the 1970s.
Oh, but that's the perfect analogy.
Right. You had kids who didn't have access to traditional instruments, so they took two turntables and isolated the drum breaks of old funk records, essentially inventing a new instrument out of playback devices.
Just using whatever is around them.
Exactly. It's creating a scene out of sheer passion, necessity, and whatever technology is lying around. But here is where I get stuck when I read these historical accounts.
What's that?
Well, throwing a legendary sweaty party with incredible energy is one thing. Thousands of great parties happen every weekend all over the world, and they just fade into absolute obscurity.
Sure.
How does a local Kampala party somehow construct a megaphone large enough to shout across the entire planet?
That is the difference between a fleeting cultural moment and a lasting cultural movement. Infrastructure. Having lightning in a bottle is totally useless if you don't build a power grid to distribute the electricity.
Oh, wow. Yeah.
By 2016, so 3 years into throwing these events, Dilsizian, De Breu, and the artists surrounding them realized that the sounds being generated in these rooms were too historically significant to just evaporate into the night air when the speakers were turned off.
It couldn't just stay a party.
Right. The party had to evolve into an institution. So they formalized the chaos. They launched a record label, Nyege Nyege tapes.
They built the power grid.
Exactly.
They transformed from party promoters into archivists and distributors.
And a record label fundamentally is a mechanism for curation and export. When they established Nyege Nyege tapes, they weren't just creating a digital folder to upload MP3s to the internet.
It wasn't just a SoundCloud link.
No, they were creating a unified aesthetic identity. They mastered the audio so it would sound incredible on massive club sound systems. They created striking visual artwork for the releases.
Giving it a real brand.
Yeah, and they built the PR machinery required to send this music to serious music journalists in London, Berlin, and Tokyo. By branding it as Nyege Nyege tapes, they sent a very clear signal to the global music press.
Like, pay attention to us.
Exactly. The signal was, this is not a random collection of songs. This is a cohesive, unified, avant-garde movement, and you ignore it at your own peril.
Let's look at the actual physics of this music then, because there was one specific release from 2016 that the sources point to as the Rosetta Stone for the entire Nyege Nyege philosophy.
Oh, yes.
It's an album called Disco Vumbi Dash Boutique Electronic. And when I was reviewing the production notes on this project, the methodology just blew my mind.
It's brilliant.
The producer didn't invent sounds out of thin air. They took two incredibly specific, historically deep African musical forms, chakacha and benga styles.
And we really must establish what those traditional styles actually are to understand the magnitude of the transformation here.
Right, set the stage for us.
So, chakacha is a traditional coastal rhythm, heavily rooted in Swahili culture. It is characterized by incredibly complex rolling percussion, traditionally played on drums and brass, and it has a very specific swaying tempo.
Okay, so it's a very organic, swaying rhythm.
Exactly. Benga, on the other hand, originated in Kenya and is built around the acoustic guitar. But the guitar in benga isn't played in a Western strumming style.
How is it played?
It is plucked rapidly to mimic the dizzying, syncopated rhythms of traditional stringed instruments like the nyatiri lyre. Both styles are deeply organic, acoustic, and steeped in decades of East African history.
So you have these rich, acoustic, historically heavy sounds. And what Disco Vumbi did was basically drag them kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
Totally.
They fed those intricate benga guitar plucks and those rolling chupacha drum patterns directly into the machinery of modern electronic dance music. They layered them over punishingly heavy synthesized bass lines. They chopped up the acoustic rhythms and looped them at club-ready tempos.
They engineered a deliberate mutation. The genius of the Disco Vumbi release is that it didn't treat the traditional sounds with a gentle, museum-like reverence.
Like it wasn't precious about it.
Right. Often when Western electronic producers use African music, they just loop a tiny vocal sample in the background to give a standard house track an exotic flavor.
Yeah, just sprinkling it on top.
It's a cheap garnish. Nyege Nyege tapes did the exact opposite. They used the traditional chakacha and benga as the primary load-bearing architecture of the track.
Wow.
And they used the electronic tools, the heavy kicks, the sub-bass, the distortion to make those traditional rhythms sound aggressively, undeniably massive.
It's a sonic declaration.
Yeah.
I mean, it proves that local heritage doesn't need to be preserved in amber, you know?
Yeah.
It can be weaponized for the modern dance floor.
Weaponized is a great word for it.
But to really understand the scope of what Nyege Tapes is exporting, we need to move past the broad philosophy and dissect the actual genres they are championing. And the sources highlight three distinct musical mutations.
Right, and Singeli solved the problem of youth expression through sheer aggressive speed. To examine this first genre, we have to shift our focus away from the inland elevation of Kampala. We are traveling to the dense, sprawling coastal slums of Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, tracing back to the early 2000s.
The genre born in these streets is called Singeli, and I mentioned the 220 beats per minute heartbeat at the very beginning of this deep dive.
Right, that crazy number.
When I first saw that number in the technical breakdowns, I honestly assumed the researchers had made a tychographical error.
I don't blame you.
Because standard electronic dance music, the kind of four-on-the-floor house or techno you hear in a standard commercial nightclub, sits very comfortably around 120, maybe 128 BPM.
It's a nice, easy pace.
Right. It matches the tempo of a brisk walk or a light jog. Singeli music absolutely obliterates that standard. It idles at 180 BPM, regularly quizzes at 200, and frequently pushes to an astonishing 220 beats per minute or higher.
To contextualize that velocity for you, at 220 beats per minute, the kick drum is striking nearly 4 times every single second.
Wait, let me stop you right there, because as a listener trying to visualize this, the physics just don't seem to make sense.
How so?
Well, if you tried to physically tap your foot to a Singeli track at 220 BPM, your calf muscle would cramp and fail in under 30 seconds.
Oh, easily.
How does a human crowd even dance to this? And more importantly, how does the human ear process it? When you speed up an audio track that fast, doesn't it just instantly degrade into a muddy, unlistenable blur of white noise?
It absolutely would turn into a wall of white noise if it were arranged like a traditional pop song.
Okay, so what's the trick?
This is where the acoustic engineering of Singeli reveals its brilliance. The producers instinctively understand the physics of high tempos. Because the BPM is astronomical, the actual architecture of the track has to be surgically clean.
So no clutter.
Exactly. Singeli is built on a relentless, continuous 4/4 drum pattern. The bass lines are incredibly rudimentary, often just a single pulsing sub-frequency. The melodies are stripped down to the most minimal, razor-sharp synthesizer loops.
Got it.
There are no lush, sweeping chords or dense layers of harmony. The minimalism is the acoustic trick that allows the speed to remain readable and punchy to the human ear. If you add too many elements at 220 BPM, the frequencies clash and create mud. By stripping everything away except the rhythm, the speed becomes a crystal-clear weapon.
Okay, so the instrumental track is a completely uncluttered, hyperspeed highway.
Ah.
But the sources point out that the producers aren't the main attraction here.
No, not at all.
The element that truly anchors Singeli, the thing that turns it from a producer's novelty into a massive cultural phenomenon, is the vocalist. Singeli is fiercely driven by MCs delivering high-speed raps, chants, and vocal percussion directly over these 200 BPM beats.
And crucially, the sources emphasize that this space is heavily dominated by female MCs.
And here's where it gets really interesting. You have an electronic genre operating at speeds that require absolute physical mastery just to catch a breath, and it is the women of Dar es Salaam who are commanding the microphone.
It's incredible.
It requires Olympic-level breath control and rhythmic precision to spit syllables that fast without falling behind the beat.
It really does. And this elevates Singeli from a mere musical genre into a powerful sociological tool.
Right.
We're looking at a hyperkinetic street culture and a largely male-dominated society. When a female MC steps up to the microphone at a Singeli block party, matches a 220 BPM drum machine syllable for syllable, and physically commands the energy of the entire crowd, she is asserting a level of dominance, skill, and presence that is impossible to ignore or marginalize.
Oh, you literally can't look away.
Exactly. The speed of the music demands absolute authority from the vocalist. It becomes an incredibly potent vehicle for gender equality and youth empowerment.
It reminds me of a live jazz cipher, but running on weapons-grade rocket fuel.
That is a brilliant way to picture it.
It is intensely reliant on live, improvisational energy. You have a feedback loop operating in real time. The DJ is dropping these hyperspeed minimal beats. The female MC is locked into the rhythm, rapid-fire chanting, and the crowd is executing this incredibly complex, rapid-fire footwork.
Right, everyone feeding off each other.
Exactly. If the crowd's energy spikes, the DJ pushes the tempo fader up, which forces the MC to rap even faster, which whips the crowd into an even greater frenzy. The DJ, the MC, and the audience are all essentially driving a sports car with no brakes, daring each other to push the speedometer further.
It is a closed-loop system of communal adrenaline, and when Nyege Nyege tapes recognized the sheer kinetic force of this Tanzanian street music, they began heavily curating and releasing it to the world.
Which gives us a great timeline to look at.
Yes, by looking at the specific artifacts they released, we can actually track how this extreme genre evolved. In 2018, the label released a landmark Singeli album by a producer named Bamba Pana titled Poa.
And Bamba Pana's philosophy was essentially, limits do not exist.
Pretty much.
The research notes on Poa state that he relentlessly pushed the tracks well past the 200 BPM mark. It is a sheer assault of velocity. It is pure, unadulterated friction.
It established the absolute ceiling of how fast the genre could physically go, but cultural movements cannot survive on speed alone, you know? They must eventually nuance themselves.
Right, you hit a wall eventually.
Exactly. This is why the contrast with the subsequent Nyege Nyege release is so illuminating. In 2019, an artist named J Mitta released an album called Tatiso Pesa. J Mitta took the fundamental architecture of Singeli, but he made a calculated acoustic trade-off. He pulled the tempo back slightly.
And just to be clear for you listening, when we say he pulled the tempo back, we were talking about slowing it down to maybe 180 or 190 BPM.
Right.
Which is still heart attack speed for virtually any other dance music on Earth.
Right.
But in the Singeli universe, it is taking your foot slightly off the gas pedal.
Exactly. But by sacrificing that fraction of a second in velocity, J Mitta bought himself acoustic space. He used that slightly slower tempo to introduce incredibly rich, complex, polyrhythmic percussion layers that would have been completely muddied at 220 BPM. He traded sheer speed for massive rhythmic texture.
That makes total sense.
Tatiso Pesa proved to the global electronic community that Singeli wasn't just a localized novelty of speed. It was a flexible, evolving musical language capable of incredible sophistication.
So Singeli pushes the physical limits of the human body and acts as an adrenaline-fueled megaphone for the youth of Dar es Salaam. But what if the goal of the music isn't just to blow off steam?
Right.
What if the goal isn't sheer acceleration, but rather a profound desire to communicate with your ancestors. You can't do that at 200 BPM.
No, you definitely cannot.
That requires a totally different acoustic engineering, which is exactly what a group of visionary producers in northern Uganda realized, leading us to our second genre deep dive.
This is where we leave the Tanzanian coast and travel to the cultural heartland of the Acholi people in northern Uganda. The genre we are dissecting here is known as Acholitronix.
And to understand the electronic mutation, we first have to understand the acoustic source code. The foundation of Acholitronix is traditional Lara Karaka music.
Right.
The historical context provided in our sources paints a beautiful picture of Lara Karaka. This is not casual background music. It is deeply ceremonial, historically meant for massive village festivals, and most notably, traditional weddings.
It's vital to the community.
It is. It is the music of courtship, of community bonding, of generations coming together to celebrate life events.
Lara Karaka is the rhythmic scaffolding of Acholi cultural life. It involves large groups of dancers, complex vocal choruses, the rhythmic shaking of calabashes, and deeply specific acoustic stringed instruments. It is community and acoustic form.
Now, hold that image in your mind. If you're listening right now, imagine taking the most sacred, joyful wedding songs that your grandparents and great-grandparents danced to in their village.
Songs with deep meaning.
Yes, songs that carry the entire emotional weight of your family's history.
Oh.
You take those exact melodies, you drag them into an underground nightclub with massive subwoofers, and you plug them directly into a bank of analog synthesizers and drum machines.
Wow.
That cultural short circuit, that wild collision of village heritage and underground club culture, is Acholitronix.
And if we connect this to the overarching strategy of Nyege Nyege, the mechanics of Acholitronix are a brilliant exercise in cultural synthesis.
How so?
Remember how Singeli had to strip away melody to accommodate its insane 220 BPM speed?
Right, it had to be minimal.
Acholitronix takes the opposite approach. The producers of this genre deliberately keep the BPM much more manageable, usually anchoring it right between 120 and 160 beats per minute.
Wait, but if you are a producer trying to make a massive modern club track, why would you restrict your tempo? I mean, if you take a traditional 120 BPM wedding song and try to force it to sound like a modern rave track, doesn't it run the risk of just sounding like a weird, clunky remix?
Like a mashup gone wrong.
Exactly. Like playing an old folk record alongside a ticking metronome.
It would sound incredibly clunky if they simply slapped a generic house beat underneath an old recording. But that is not what they are doing.
Okay.
They keep the tempo at 120 to 160 BPM because they are maintaining the exact traditional pulse of the original Lara Karaka dance. They are not forcing the Acholi heritage into a Western electronic mold. They are using the digital tools to build an electronic framework around the ancestral heartbeat.
Explain the HOW of that process to me. Like, how do they actually execute that synthesis technically?
They do it through meticulous sound design. Instead of hiring a traditional band to play the instruments, they sit down with modern analog synthesizers and painstakingly program the voltage-controlled oscillators to recreate the exact tonal frequencies of traditional Acholi stringed instruments.
They're building the instruments from scratch digitally.
Exactly. They program the digital drum machines to swing and stutter with the exact polyrhythms of the traditional calabash shakers. They build these massive, intricate electronic loops, and then they weave actual raw vocal samples of traditional Acholi singers right into the mix, often trading verses with modern rhythmic rapping.
So they are essentially forcing the microchips inside the synthesizers to speak the ancient Acholi language.
That's a poetic way to say it, yeah.
It is a literal conversation across time, happening over a heavy club beat. And the most prominent architect of this sound, according to the research, is an artist named Odom Alpha. In 2017, Nyege Nyege released his groundbreaking project, Gulu City Anthems.
A hugely important release.
The sources are very explicit about his methodology. Odom Alpha literally reverse-engineered traditional Lara Karaka wedding songs and rebuilt them from the ground up for the electronic era.
Because Odom Alpha realized that electronic club music and traditional Lara Karaka actually share a fundamental purpose. They are both designed to make a community dance for hours on end. By giving the traditional melodies club-friendly intros, massive bass buildups, and heavy beat drops, he translated the village festival into a language that a 20-year-old in a Kampala nightclub instantly understands.
The evolution of this process goes even deeper into the acoustic weeds, too. The sources detail a fascinating collaboration released in 2023 between an electronic producer named Rian Trainer and an Acoli musician named Osen James.
Oh, saccades.
Yes. They released an album called Saccades, and they focused their entire acoustic experiment on one specific, highly traditional instrument, the rigiri-giri fiddle.
And the rigiri-giri is an incredible piece of acoustic engineering on its own. It is a single-stringed tube fiddle. Because it only has one string, it produces a very distinct, raw, scratching, highly rhythmic resonance. It is not a smooth, sweeping violin sound. It is percussive and sharp.
Right. And what Trainer and James did on Saccades is the ultimate manifestation of the Nyege Nyege philosophy. They didn't just place a microphone in front of Osen James while he played the rigiri-giri fiddle and hit record.
No, that would be too simple.
They took the raw, acoustic scraping sound of that single string, fed that audio signal directly into a complex modular synthesizer setup, and manipulated the physics of the sound wave. They took a 1-second acoustic scratch from a traditional fiddle and stretched it into a 10-second, infinitely echoing, room-shaking bass drop.
It's pure sonic manipulation.
They merged the organic resonance of the wood and string with the infinite spatial texture of electronic effects.
Which forces us to ask the ultimate question, right?
Why does this matter?
Exactly. So what does this all mean? Why does Acholitronix matter beyond being a technically impressive sound design experiment?
Right.
It matters because this is arguably the most effective form of cultural preservation occurring right now. We have a tendency in the West to think of preservation as putting a fragile artifact behind temperature-controlled glass in a museum where people can quietly observe it.
Like it's dead.
Yes. Acholitronix proves that locking culture behind glass is how it gathers dust and dies. The only way to ensure ancient traditions survive is by allowing them to mutate. Acholitronix bridges the massive chasm between rural village history and hyper-connected urban youth.
I mean, if you force an 18-year-old in Kampala to listen to a crackling archival tape of a wedding from 1950, they might respect it, but they probably aren't going to put it on their daily playlist.
Definitely not.
But if you take that exact same wedding melody, synthesize it, put a massive sub-bass underneath it, and blast it in a club, that 18-year-old is going to sweat and dance to the exact same rhythms their ancestors did.
Exactly.
It ensures the Lara Karaka tradition is actively felt in the muscles, not just vaguely remembered in a history book.
It is an active, living history. It is a brilliant strategy for cultural survival. And what is truly remarkable is that Nyege Nyege tapes did not restrict this philosophy of technological reinterpretation to the African mainland. As the collective's influence grew, they began seeking out other localized, historically significant sounds to amplify.
Which takes us to our third and final deep dive into specific genres. We are leaving the continent of Africa entirely. We are heading out into the Indian Ocean, specifically to Reunion Island.
Right.
The musical mutation we are investigating here is called Electro-Maloya.
And to appreciate the profound weight of Electro-Maloya, we have to look unblinkingly at the history of the traditional Maloya music it is built upon. Because unlike Lara Karaka, which was born of joyous celebration, Maloya is a sound born from immense hardship, forced labor, and desperate resilience.
The historical documentation in our sources is very clear on this. Reunion Island has a complex, painful history involving slavery and indentured servitude. Maloya was the music created by the slaves and immigrants of Malagasy and African descent who were brought to the island.
And they were working with nothing.
Right. They didn't have access to refined instruments, so they built percussion out of whatever they had: large cylindrical drums called the roulaire and flat shakers made of cane called the kayam. The music was a vital survival mechanism.
It kept them going.
They used the complex rhythms and call-and-response vocal choruses to express the grueling realities of their daily labor, their sorrows, and their enduring humanity.
It was the acoustic tether that held a marginalized community together under brutal conditions. And the power of that rhythmic unification was so potent, so undeniable, that the state apparatus recognized it as a genuine threat.
They were actually afraid of the music.
Yes. During the 20th century, the French administration on Reunion Island actively restricted and suppressed the performance of Maloya music. They tried to outlaw the rhythm itself.
Here is the ultimate paradox of Electro-Maloya. When a government uses its resources to actively suppress and outlaw a specific musical form, they are unintentionally proving just how powerful that culture is.
Right, you don't ban something weak.
Exactly. They forced the music underground, but they couldn't erase the rhythm from the people's collective memory. The music survived in the shadows for decades. Fast forward to the 21st century, and a new generation of producers began taking those surviving Maloya rhythms and feeding them into electronic samplers and synthesizers, creating the Electro-Maloya championed by Nyege Nyege today.
And the translation of Maloya into the electronic realm requires an entirely different acoustic approach than Singeli or Acholitronix. You cannot take a music steeped in that much generational pain and historical weight and simply slap a relentless high-speed techno beat underneath it.
That would just feel wrong.
It would completely shatter the soul of the genre. Therefore, Electro-Maloya is engineered to be highly experimental, incredibly spacious, and deliberately slow. It usually sits between 100 and 140 BPM, honoring the original leisurely hypnotic swaying rhythm of the traditional roulette drum.
The sources emphasize that it relies heavily on traditional polyrhythms. But let me stop there, because when I hear the technical term polyrhythm, I just imagine a cluttered, chaotic mess of sound.
A lot of people do.
How do producers layer all these complex rhythms together without it sounding like a drum kit falling down a flight of stairs?
Well, a polyrhythm is the musical equivalent of patting your head and rubbing your stomach flawlessly, but spread across an entire percussion section.
Okay, I can picture that.
Instead of one simple dominant drum beat that all the instruments follow in unison like a standard rock song, a polyrhythmic track layers 2, 3, or 4 completely different rhythmic time signatures on top of each other simultaneously.
So they were playing different beats at the exact same time?
Yes. The roulette drum might be playing a slow 3/4 waltz rhythm, while the kayam shaker is playing a fast 4/4 rhythm over it. The magic happens in the interlocking grooves where those different time signatures mathematically meet. It creates a deeply hypnotic, trance-like rolling sensation.
Okay, so they maintain the hypnotic polyrhythms and the slower tempo, but they are using modern tools to drastically alter the environment of the sound. The producers use heavy analog synthesizers and massive amounts of digital reverb and delay to expand the spatial texture of the traditional melodies and choruses.
Think of their use of digital reverb like taking a tiny, single acoustic candle and placing it in the direct center of a massive, pitch-black cathedral.
Oh, wow.
The music itself isn't fast, but the echoing, trailing sound waves make the music feel like it is taking up an immense amount of physical space. They take the traditional call and response vocal chants, run them through looping pedals and delays, and make the voices sound almost ghost-like, echoing infinitely through a vast electronic void.
That sounds beautiful, but also kind of haunting.
It is, yet underneath that echoing void, they build in the highly engineered, physical tension and release structures of modern club music. The slow, brooding buildup, the sudden silence of the break, and the massive, subwoofer rattling drop.
Which brings up a really profound realization for me. I'm thinking about you, the listener, experiencing this precise acoustic engineering in a modern setting.
Okay, set the scene.
Picture yourself in a massive, high-tech, concrete nightclub in London or Berlin. The strobes are flashing, the massive sound system is shaking the floorboards. The DJ cuts the lights, triggers the buildup of an Electro-Maloya track, and the beat drops.
Right.
There is something intensely staggering about that scenario. You have a rhythm that was literally forged in the agony of slavery, a rhythm that was explicitly outlawed by a government to keep marginalized people quiet. And now the exact acoustic DNA of that suppressed music is being blasted out of 60,000-watt speakers to make thousands of people move in euphoric unison.
Yeah.
How does that historical reality change the way you experience the adrenaline of a club drop?
I mean, it entirely redefines the function of the nightclub. It elevates the club environment from a superficial place of weekend escapism into a space of direct physical historical confrontation.
Yes, confrontation is the word.
When that Electro-Maloya beat drops and the sub-bass hits your chest, you are not just dancing to a clever synthetic rhythm. You are physically interacting with the unbroken resilience of a people who refuse to be silenced. It forces the global club audience to engage with the ghosts of Reunion Island's past.
But they don't even realize they're doing it at first.
Exactly. It does so not with a dry academic lecture, but through the irresistible, unifying physical power of the groove. It is the absolute synthesis of ancestral survival and futuristic technology.
It demands your attention physically before it demands it intellectually.
Yes.
You feel the groove, your body moves to the drop, and then later you ask yourself, what was that incredible sound I was just dancing to?
And then you learn the history.
Right, and the answer is centuries of human endurance. The attempt to erase the culture accidentally forged the blueprint for the ultimate global dance anthem. It is incredibly powerful.
It really is the ultimate testament to the durability of music. Now, we have traced the evolution of the Nyege Nyege label, and we have dissected the mechanics of Singeli, Acholitronix, and Electromaloya.
We've covered a lot of ground.
But a virtual network of cassette tapes and MP3s floating across the internet is not enough to sustain a true cultural revolution.
Right. It can't just live online.
Exactly. A movement requires a physical epicenter. It requires a gathering place where the producers, the MCs, and the audience can actually look each other in the eye.
You can only listen to a 220 BPM track alone in your headphones so many times before you desperately need to see the community that is generating this much energy.
You need to feel it in a crowd.
And that necessity brings us to the physical manifestation of this entire outsider music ecosystem, the Nyege Nyege Festival.
This is the moment where the digital infrastructure becomes a staggering physical reality.
The festival has been held annually since 2015, located in Jinja, Uganda, right near the source of the White Nile River.
Yeah.
And let me paint the picture of the sheer scale we are talking about here.
It's massive.
It really is. When you hear Underground Music Collective, you usually picture a few hundred people in a dark warehouse somewhere.
Right, something very niche.
The Nyege Nyege Festival has exploded into the single largest electronic music festival on the entire African continent. We are talking about drawing over 60,000 attendees from across the globe.
60,000 people.
It is a massive, multi-stage, multi-day immersive ecosystem. You have these hyper-modern, avant-garde electronic producers blasting outsider music from towering speaker stacks, while just a few feet away, impromptu circles of traditional musicians and dancers are throwing down complex acoustic rhythms in the mud.
The contrast is amazing.
It is the absolute physical embodiment of everything we have discussed today.
Imagine the sensory overload of that environment, you know? You have 60,000 people collectively experiencing the sheer velocity of a Singeli set, followed by the ancestral communication of Acholitronix, followed by the vast echoing space of Electromaloya, all vibrating against the natural backdrop of the Nile River.
It must be overwhelming in the best way.
It functions as a vital, physical hub. It gives these highly localized, hyper-specific underground artists a platform to perform for an international audience of booking agents, journalists, and fans who would otherwise never encounter their music.
Now, anytime you gather 60,000 young, energetic people in one place to celebrate boundary-pushing, avant-garde art, you are inevitably going to generate massive cultural friction.
That is unavoidable.
It is. And our sources provide a very detailed, objective account of a significant political clash that enveloped the festival. The Nyege Nyege Festival, as a platform for global underground culture, explicitly and publicly shows support for the LGBTQ+ community and promotes radical inclusion.
Right.
However, this progressive, borderless ethos has drawn direct and intense pushback from conservative religious and political groups within the region.
And the source documents trace this tension to a very specific political flashpoint that occurred in 2018. The friction between the festival's radically inclusive environment and the region's traditional moral conservatism reached the highest levels of government. The Minister of Ethics and Integrity in Uganda actually initiated a campaign to cancel the festival entirely.
They tried to shut the whole thing down.
Yes. The official citations for the attempted cancellation revolved around moral concerns, cultural clashes, and the explicit promotion of values deemed contrary to the conservative norms of the region. For a moment, the entire massive infrastructure of the festival and the global platform it provided for all these artists was on the absolute verge of being dismantled by the state.
According to the historical records in our stack, the event was saved at the 11th hour by a superseding government intervention.
It was very close.
The Minister of Internal Affairs stepped in, overruled the cancellation order from the Minister of Ethics, and provided the necessary support and clearance for the festival to continue. The gates opened, the 60,000 people flooded in, and the festival continues to operate and expand its footprint to this day.
And analyzing that 2018 event purely through a sociological lens reveals a fundamental truth about why we study art in the first place.
Which is?
Music is never, ever just music. A festival of this immense scale ceases to be just an entertainment event. It transforms into a massive cultural flashpoint. It becomes a real-time, highly visible arena for the negotiation of societal values.
It forces the issue.
The showdown between the government ministries perfectly illustrates the intense friction generated when a globally connected progressive youth movement collides with entrenched conservative traditions. The festival grounds in Jinja are not just a place to dance. They serve as an active, breathing battleground for cultural diversity, identity politics, and social inclusion.
It makes people talk about it.
It forces massive societal conversations onto the front pages of newspapers, conversations that might otherwise remain entirely unspoken.
It is the ultimate amplifier for the youth. It's exactly the same mechanism we analyzed with Singeli. When the female MC grabs the mic at 220 BPM, she is asserting her right to take up space. When Electro Maloya blasts from the speakers, it is a broadcast of a suppressed history taking up space. The festival itself, surviving cancellation and drawing 60,000 people, is the ultimate assertion of existence. The massive crowd is collectively stating, "We are here, this is what our culture sounds like, and you cannot ignore us."
And that defiant momentum is absolutely not slowing down. If we look at the current trajectory of the Nyege Nyege collective, it is abundantly clear they have no interest in resting on their laurels or endlessly repeating the formula of their early successes.
They aren't getting complacent.
No, they are actively pushing the boundaries of the experiment further.
They are continuously searching for the bleeding edge of the sonic landscape. The sources note that they have successfully launched a dedicated sublabel called Hakuna Kulala. And if the main Nyege Nyege tapes label was dedicated to warping traditional acoustic rhythms into massive club tracks, Hakuna Kulala is diving headfirst into the abstract.
Oh, totally experimental.
Yeah. They are exploring highly experimental, almost avant-garde electronic textures. They are proving that East Africa isn't just capable of reinterpreting its past. It is fully capable of inventing completely unprecedented futuristic sounds from scratch.
They have transitioned from a single label into a multi-tiered cultural ecosystem. And the most vital takeaway for anyone listening to this deep dive is that this entire radical movement is heavily documented, entirely accessible, and globally networked right now.
You can just go online and find it.
Exactly. Our sources emphasize their massive digital footprints, specifically pointing to extensive video archives like the Boiler Room X Nyege Nyege Festival broadcasts available on YouTube. Boiler Room is a massive global broadcasting platform for underground music.
Right.
The fact that they are partnering to broadcast these hyper-local East African artists in high definition proves that this is no longer a regional curiosity. A kid sitting in a bedroom in Tokyo, an electronic producer in a studio in Berlin, and a club DJ in New York are all logging on simultaneously to see what rhythms are being invented in Jinja.
It is a totally interconnected, real-time global underground. So let's pull all of these complex threads together for you. We started this deep dive with the concept of the Nyege Nyege, that sudden, physiological, uncontrollable urge to move your body.
Right.
And what we've uncovered is that two promoters in Kampala took that fundamental human urge and built an entire global infrastructure around it. They achieved something historically profound.
They really did.
They proved that the best way to preserve the localized acoustic heritage of a culture is not to protect it in a museum display case, but to plug it directly into a synthesizer and force it to adapt. They created an ecosystem that empowers marginalized urban youth, providing a massive high-speed megaphone for female MCs in Dar es Salaam.
It's changing lives.
And in doing so, they have fundamentally disrupted the geography of modern music. They are forcing the global electronic scene to stop looking exclusively to London, Berlin, or Chicago for the future of club culture and to look directly at the youth of East Africa.
It is a stunning example of how technology can be used to amplify humanity rather than erase it. But before we conclude, this entire exploration raises an important question, a final thought experiment for you to consider long after this deep dive ends.
Oh, I love these.
We have just spent the last hour examining how sacred Larakarka wedding choruses and historically suppressed Maloya labor rhythms can be both fiercely protected and radically mutated by analog synthesizers and drum machines.
Yeah.
I want you to think about the deeply traditional acoustic music from your own heritage. Think about the oldest folk songs from your own hometown, the melodies your great-grandparents might have sung.
Okay, picture that.
If the brilliant avant-garde producers of the Nyege Nyege collective got their hands on those specific archival recordings, what would your personal history sound like at 200 beats per minute?
Wow. I absolutely love that concept. What does your family's acoustic history sound like when it is heavily distorted, cranked to maximum volume, and forced to sweat on a crowded dance floor?
It's quite the paradox to think about.
Think about that paradox. Thank you so much for joining us on this incredibly fast-paced deep dive. Until next time, keep listening closely, keep questioning the boundaries of tradition, and never stop searching for that uncontrollable urge.